production is brought to you by DHBN, WTHC Radio, and Stoner Records.
Stepping up strong with a righteous plea. Summer Parker fighting for you and me. Patients need what the doctor has said. Safe access now to the meds they spread. One love, one fight, don't you delay. Rights for the people in every way. We stand tall, we won't back down. Safe access is the anthem sound. Safe access is the anthem sound. The struggle is real, so is the fire. For health and hope we climb higher. Stand with the ones who can't stand alone. For every voice deserves a throne. Compassion leads where the laws resist. A healer's heart can't coexist with barriers blocking what we deserve. The people's needs must be preserved. One love, one fight, don't you delay. Rights for the people in every way. We stand tall, we won't back down. Safe access is the anthem sound. Safe access is the anthem sound. Summer's voice, it carries the flame. For justice, chant her name again. We stand tall, we won't back down. Safe access is the anthem sound. For the people's care, we will sustain.
Hello, hello. Are we live? Live? All right. So, welcome in, guys, to week 6 of the Patients for Safe Access weekly podcast. And this gentleman sitting beside me is Jeff Havard from Havard Labs. And this week we're going to be talking with Jeff about a lot of different things, actually. I had the pleasure of meeting Jeff up at the Capitol for OMA Executive Advisory Council meetings, for open public comment meetings, for all kinds of different things. We've reached out to each other in the last, 6 months or so, kind of going back and forth and trying to pair up and work together a little bit here. And so we're going to be doing some testing through Havard Labs in the future, and we're excited to be able to do that. And so why don't you give me kind of like a little, hey, how are you intro?
Sure. So we are a licensed local testing lab here in Oklahoma, testing medical marijuana since about 2019. And we're very focused on making sure that, we put out safe products and that we kind of look at the industry issues and try to help report on those and kind of help further that as well. So that's where I think we very much align.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, you gave me a report last time that I saw you, and it was the microbial testing report. And what interested me in this report was you use the term off-shelf testing, right? And we tell people that we do shelf accuracy testing, right? And so it was very much so, like you said, it aligns to being the same thing, where you're going out and you're buying these products off of the shelves, and you're actually bringing these products back to your lab, and you're testing these products here, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and it's interesting. Have you, and Charles isn't in here for this, he's going to be so upset. It's okay. So have you submitted your tests that you've done on your research side of it, not necessarily tests from samples from clients, okay, but have you submitted your research testing to the regulatory agency, to OMA?
Yes, that is something we try to share with the OMA as well, and then like other of our representatives and senators as well, and just basically avenues where we can help kind of distribute this information and kind of teach the public. So we've been at other various events, like at dispensaries and other cannabis events, and tried to spread these reports there too, just to make sure that the people that are using these products are kind of aware of it, to make sure that other labs and regulatory agencies are all kind of aware of the things that we're looking at.
Do you feel like that the OMMA has been responsive to the research data that you've provided to them at all? Or do you feel comfortable answering that?
No, I'm totally fine. So
Okay. I'm throwing him on the spot, you guys.
No, you're fine. Like, I really think that, like, a really big thing in order to solve problems is communication. So, I really try to be as open as, as possible, just so we can, like, have these conversations and hopefully, fix these issues. So, responsive, I wouldn't necessarily, I don't know. I've presented reports, so I feel like they have been acknowledged, but as far as, like, any kind of actions to look into it, or the other issues that we're looking into, I'm not sure that there's really much been done on that end. So,
and for those of you that are tuning in that maybe are not from Oklahoma, the OMMA is the Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority, and that's the regulatory agency in our state that governs the regulations for medical marijuana in our state. We do not have recreational currently or adult use as it's known in some markets. We do have a rec bill going, 837, that we talked to Jed about last week. So that was a really cool conversation last week on that. And we've run into him at the Capitol all the time too, And so in your testing though, like, the reason why I asked that is whenever we've taken our testing that we've went out, we've purchased the product off of the retail shelf, we've submitted it for the testing to a Oklahoma medical marijuana licensed lab, and we present the data to them. And unbeknownst to us, after we've spent basically our life savings doing this process, is that we found out that they actually will not take our tests and utilize those as, and it doesn't have to be as fact, but you need to at least take them and investigate them, right? And so they don't take it, I don't feel like they take the patient testing as seriously as they should, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
We have tested so many brands, and you and I have kind of talked a little bit back and forth. We've tested multiple medical marijuana brands that have tested and hot for pesticides and heavy metals and things like that. And there's a lot of safe cannabis out there. There really is. There's tons of safe cannabis out there, but there's also unsafe cannabis out there. And that's what your off-shelf report talks about. Is it actually talks about pre-rolls specifically. So will you tell me a little bit about this recent report?
Sure. So, so this particular report is kind of a follow-up to one that we did last year. I think it was in June or July. I have to look. It was in June of last year. So, for a couple of years, there wasn't any microbial testing that were done on pre-rolls. I think the regulation basically stated that, like, you would test the flower initially, and if it passed for microbials and other things, that you didn't have to retest for those same things as they went into these products. But we did know that on pre-rolls that was microbial failures were one of the most common failures that you would see with pre-rolls, and we were kind of shocked to see that was actually dropped from for testing on these particular products when they were doing, like, pre-roll panels. So we were just curious that, like, after a couple of years had passed, if it was, like, still an issue since we weren't actually physically looking at it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we went to various dispensaries. We purchased a bunch of random pre-rolls. We let the bud tenders pick it, so we didn't have any biases there.
Right.
And then so that was pretty key to us. We wanted to make sure that we weren't trying to have any biases. So we purchased, mm-hmm. like, multiple different strains, multiple different dispensaries, completely different products, and then we tested them when we found, like, 14 out of the 15 failed for what would be required for like flower samples. So
wow,
that's
a lot. That's like almost every single one, literally.
Yeah, I think it was a 93% failure for total mold and yeast, and that was the only thing we looked at that point in time. But last year the regulations had changed. We had argued final form testing, which had been a pretty hot topic last year, and we were arguing that these pre-rolls were in final form and that they should be tested in final form. So the regulations changed, and now, like, between 6 to 9 months has passed since the regulations changed, and we were just curious to see if like anything had changed, like if like this problem was at least greatly reduced or eliminated. And we found that there's not really any significant change in the microbial failures that are on these products. So And I feel kind of like this is a way of serving as like kind of a check out there as well. Like I know the OMA has been talking about doing secret shopping, but it's essentially the same thing that we're kind of already doing here. So
Right. Yeah. No. And it's a good way to do field data and bring that back to this research right here, and then to provide it to the regulatory agencies. I guess I'm stumbling my words here, but I'll get it out. With the OMA, you know, like I said, we found that, and we've done hundreds of tests. Like when I tell you hundreds of tests, we're like in the 200 plus testing range between the medical marijuana, the hemp, the tobacco, the soil and water, all of it, right?
Yeah.
And to know that they don't take that, you know, as this is an actual problem, you know, and that how long it takes them as the regulatory agency to deal with that problem is absolutely astronomically horrendous. I am so disappointed in our regulatory agency in our state and their ability to protect the patients in our state. And meeting you guys and talking to you guys about this lab stuff, I mean, you've got these slides right here, you know, and you can hold a couple of them up and kind of explain what they are. But, you know, this is what you're finding in these pre-rolls, you know what I mean? And it's an unsafe product, in that opinion. But because of that testing, because it's all changed, right? This isn't tested for now, right?
So yeah, up until last year, it did change where we're testing these pre-rolls in final form. But there was a period, and I would have to go dig through the regulations to figure out when it changed. But I think from like basically 2022 to 2024, and it may be a little bit longer period than that, where we were able to do these pre-roll panels that excluded microbial testing. So there was a gap of time where it wasn't required, but as of at least October, somewhere between August to October of last year, it is required testing now for pre-roll products.
Now, final form changed some other things though, because originally a grower, whenever they harvested their batch, would have to send that batch in for, you know, testing before it was submitted to a processor or to go on down the chain, right?
Yeah.
And that step has also been removed, hasn't it, with that final form bill, that language? And that's just crazy to me. I don't know how they allowed that. You know, one, that affected the lab's bottom line, I'm sure. You know what I mean? Because you cut out a testing step in there, you know, so that takes out a test that you guys would have been doing initially, you know.
But it empowered the ones that are vertically integrated.
How so?
Well, because if you're vertically integrated, you don't have to pay for that extra test to go from the grower to the processor.
Okay.
That's it saves you on costs, especially if you're doing lots of producing.
Okay, so what he's over here saying, this is Mo over here to the side, and what he's saying is for people that are vertically integrated, meaning that they have the grow, the processor, and the dispensary, or however, even just the grow and the processor, they don't have to worry about that step. It did save them, a step to save them money.
And if you know what you're putting in your product, it would make sense why you would want to save on that cost.
Right. But those that aren't.
Yeah, and I would say like the other potential liability here, and this is just my opinion on this, but I would think that like if you were to process something that actually was a contaminated sample and now you've contaminated the rest of your processing equipment because you didn't get that test, I mean, that's
everything else behind that is going to have contaminants too.
Possibly, yeah.
Potentially.
So you could potentially have some carryover just depending on how equipment's done. So I'm not a processor, so I can't exactly speak to that, but
I'm not either.
I would think that
I'm sure someone would jump in at some point.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. But I would think that like if you were kind of unsure of the material that you were getting, or if you were getting it bulk from a bunch of people and didn't know if the product was clean or not, then it would be kind of a an issue of like getting contaminated product in your equipment. So while I think it would be kind of a better idea maybe to like at least run a safety test of all things, just the safety part, excluding like potency and terpenes and other things like that. But to me, that's sort of a little bit of insurance, but I'm not a processor.
Like a safety panel.
And I'm not a processor, so that's
but that's kind of also the problem with like regulation and then having a private business where if you're in that private business, if you know what ingredients you're putting in, why the unnecessary tests, right?
Right.
So it's like if I already can trust myself and I don't need some regulatory body to tell me how to do it, because that kind of helps the straw owners in like a way. It just helps the money men be like, here's the money, and we do want accountability because you really don't have any equity in this company, and I want to see actually what you're doing in order to grow your like yield.
Right.
So that would help them if they're wanting to be honest, but they'd kind of be distant owners asking for accountability. They'd want that check there. Rather than, let's say, somebody that is a grower that is involved and is like, hey, this is our baby, this is what we're doing. We're not using these ingredients.
Mhm.
I shouldn't have to pay for testing between flour and if I want to make my concentrates because I know they're clean.
Right.
So that's kind of like this thing of that argument, that dance, where I think then the state government's only position is to be in what's for safety, and some players are ruining it.
No, absolutely.
And then maybe they're actually going to capitalize, in my opinion, potentially, if you're playing the game correctly. If the game's just how you get enough resources to keep making a commodity that people then need, I think then it almost behoove you to play that way.
And I don't know who ran that final form language and stuff like that. I'll have to check into that because I'm pretty sure, if I understand correctly, it was something done with Durbin's law group, but I'm not 100% positive.
Wow. I'm not sure. There was so many different moving parts of that. Like I know there was a bunch of like labs that met up to discuss final form testing. We had our own opinion about like final form should actually apply to like anything that's final form, such as like, you know, edibles, pre-rolls, like whether it's in a vape cart, like everything. If we're doing final form, then it should be uniform across the board.
And final form to me as a patient, what that means to me is how I get that product from the dispensary. You know what I mean? And I know there was a lot of conversation, you know, out in the community whenever the final form was coming through about, well, what does it actually mean? You know, and a lot of people were testing biomass samples when they should have been testing the end result, you know, and things like that. So there was some testing that wasn't even being done accurately. You know, we saw a recall in November 2023 with alien house extracts due to that exact same thing, you know, happening. And it was biomass testing and not final form testing. And so, you know, that final form, it messed up a lot of different things. So it'd be interesting to know who was behind it. I'll have to do some research when we get off of here.
Yeah.
And actually, Anthony might even know that one. I'm sure he does, actually. So. But let's see, we've got about 3 minutes before the 420 show. So do you want to show them a couple of these?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so I pulled out a few of these plates that we use. We use these 3M rapid yeast and mold plates, which are pretty standard for the testing.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, a lot of labs around here use it. But like, yeah, these are some of the examples of what some of the plates look like when we tested them, and some of the failures we got from like looking at the pre-roll samples.
Uh-oh.
I don't know.
Something happened, Hippie. There we go. All right.
Okay, so we're back. So yeah, we tested 20 samples, and these are the plates that we use to provide counts for those. And
I'll try to pull one up that way. Let's see if that's a little bit better.
oh, like closer or
Yep.
something. Okay, so yeah, this is like just one of the plates we looked at.
So all those little dots that they're seeing on that, it's all different
Yeah,
little pieces of microbial.
yeah. So the smaller ones are going to be yeast, and the larger ones are going to be mold. So the ones that are like the larger circles are the mold.
And is this those pre-rolls that are in this report?
Yeah,
Or
so
is this-
exactly.
Okay.
And so like they're all listed in order in the report, and the same thing in these plates. They're all listed in order too of the ones that we went through. So
Yeah, so 14 out of 15 pre-rolls fell from microbials, and that's every bit of mold and yeast that you could possibly think of. So what all do we test in the microbials category in the state of Oklahoma?
sure. So we're looking at total yeast and mold, which are one count, like one collective count together. We're looking at also presence of like E. coli, but specifically the Shingha toxin producing one. We're looking at presence of Salmonella, and we're also looking at 4 different species of Aspergillus as well. So that's the entirety of like the microbial panel. So for the first report we did, we were just looking at total yeast and mold because that is a very, very, very common failure. We did that again here too, but we also looked to see if we could find any E. coli or Salmonella as well. We did find that 2 of the samples did produce 1 colony of Salmonella.
And I gotta say, that blows my mind because even with all of the stuff I've done now in this cannabis industry, right, I honestly just never thought about salmonella in cannabis. And that just blows my mind. So we're getting ready to break for the 420 song, but when we come back, we'll pick that up.
All right,
How's
sounds
that
good.
sound? All right, hippie, take us out.
Hey, it's Bill Schmidt Jr., a.k.a. Billy Blaze, a.k.a. 420 Kid of the Holistic Cloud. R.I.P. to my man Derek Crum. I want to give a shout out to Calligraphy, my dude Means, little homie Manuel Noriega, Big Just, Rossi, Jack the Apostle, The League.
Smoke 'em if you got 'em. Big buzz till little crumbs broke up in the bottom. Feel like autumn leaves falling. Only problem needs solving is seeing who I'm calling for some trees to indulge in. Need to holler at Billy, he keep his head in the cloud. Bel Air Kush by the bush, wow. Screaming loud, still smoking, having nice dreams, floating through space. So when they ask me how high, my reply, I'm half baked. Sir, smoke a lot. Doctor said I need a bacchiotomy. Prescribe me huckleberry and lemon cherry gelato, G. I take it back to rolling in the Optimo, blowing smoke out my nose, dropping ashes on my clothes till I doze off. I'm so fried, no lie. Got you afraid of heights, scared to look down, you so high. Cause when I split that shit, it's like I lit that shit in the crowd. Pass it around and let you hit that shit.
Weed is all I need. Smoke that weed. Weed is all I breathe. Broke down leaves. Roll up in the leaf for my relief. I'm in love with the THC.
Roll that shit, lick that shit, burn it. 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 Got sunshine in my pocket on a Sunday stroll. Homie got the rap, give me the sack, let the good times roll. Therapy, earth, body, and soul. World, give me beat, Bel Air Kush, give me mental control. L lit, back roll, 5 hats told. The studio we roll, bring relief. We the music, all I need to know. Healthier than pill pop. Mother, give me herbs to fill spot. My medication, cancer will kill shot. Many strands, lay hands in stressful situations. Out of all the girls in my life, Mary Jane, a reservation. Here in 23, raising hands of liberation. A celebration, history free from information. Stand up, provide the right education. Show love, holistic cloud, politic throughout the nation. Making a stop debating Billy Blunt, stash, flavor, taste the weed.
Weed is all I need. Smoke that weed. Weed is all I breathe. Broke down leaves. Roll up in the leaf for my relief. I'm in love with the THC.
Roll that shit, lick that shit, burn it. 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 Roll that shit, lick that shit, burn it.
All right, so that was Calligraph, I believe is how you say it. And man, check out those damned outfits. Those were like fly as hell. I like the marijuana outfits at the end. They reminded me of a friend of ours here in Oklahoma, Tony Blunt's man, and he does mental health walks, and he wears all this cannabis stuff, and it's really cool what he does. So, but we were talking about something much more serious before we took the break. And that was salmonella and cannabis. And man, like, okay, guys, I got to wrap my head around this. I really do. Because obviously, you know, you get salmonella, E. coli, things like that from different foods and that type of thing. But I guess I've never really considered it in my cannabis. So kind of how does that happen?
So to be honest, I'm not entirely sure where the sources of these come from. I can only speculate maybe from like soils or other things that make it up onto like the finished product. So when we've done soil samples, we have seen like it is very microbially active, like, right, because you need the microbes in the soils in order to push up the nutrients into the plants. And so like yeah, whenever we're looking at testing soil samples, like they're usually pretty heavy with all sorts of micro, and usually that's where we will end up seeing like the E. coli and things. And I'm just assuming that's where the salmonella may be contained, but
Right.
I can't really 100% speak to that because I'm not
I'm
really
just
sure.
like, I'm still over here trying to think, like, have I smoked salmonella and didn't know it? You know, like, how weird would that be? You know, like, and what would it do to your body? Like, the difference between, like, ingesting it versus inhaling it. I mean, that just, I have so many questions down on that.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess rates of metabolism and the way they're uptaken, kind of depend on like other different types of drugs and things, whether you get like an injectable or a pill or whatnot, or whether you're inhaling it. So
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine like there's probably
Totally blows my mind. Totally blows my mind. And have you found E. coli in cannabis before?
yeah, it happens. It happens occasionally.
All right, y'all heard it from the lab, man. That just blows my mind. So Anthony wanted us to show a couple more of these, to kind of like show how like prominent this stuff is in these pre-rolls.
Yeah. So here's a few other slides that we have. So once again, let's see. Two of these plates are failures. So like this one is a failure. If you can see that. So once again, the small little dots are the yeast, and the larger ones, the larger circles that you see, are molds, and these are combined together for a total count. The next one we have is actually a pass.
I was fixing to ask, what makes a pass?
So the counts have to be 10,000 colony forming units per gram or less. So like this one, like the molds tend to take up more space, kind of like this one. So the mold is taking up more space here, and there's less of an overall count. The plates kind of look worse than they are, but this one is actually a pass. And then for the last one, it also contains quite a bit of mold as well, but also yeast. And this one is also a failure. So you can see it's like pretty much teeming with life. But
teeming with life, that's one way to say it.
It is, but I mean, the one thing to note about that is like for like all the products, there's always microbials on there. There's always like pockets of yeast and mold and other things. We just want to make sure that they're within a safe level and that you don't end up getting too much exposure to those. And then, if you do, that it could cause other health problems, like in the products that you're using. So, yeah, if you're seeing something where you're getting like zero counts, like if you're seeing like no microbes on your test results, like that's probably not very accurate. Like I would definitely get a second opinion on that because, there's spores of mold and things floating around in the air, and like yeast is on everything. It's just there.
It's just there. So one thing I highly recommend because of issues like this is, as a patient, I don't think enough patients understand that they can, one, ask for the testing for their products, you know what I mean? Whether it's a medical market or an adult market, whichever state you're in. If it's legal there, if it's not, please don't be doing it. But, patients need to be asking for the certificate of analysis whenever they're buying products. And, here in the state of Oklahoma, they're actually required to provide it to the patient when it's asked for, you know what I mean? But I don't think enough patients understand, one, how to read a lab report, you know what I mean? First time I read a lab report, I'm not even gonna lie, I totally fucked that shit up, okay? I read an Abraxas report,
Yeah.
and I went into a cannabis sale, and I go in and I'm telling this lady, I'm like, oh, it's, XYZ number, it's, this, and I didn't even like understand really the milligram to gram conversion on the Abraxas reports. And I'm like, why would you put your reports like that? It's so confusing, right? But I had to learn, I had to learn all that. So yeah, patients need to learn to read a lab report. They need to learn to, what to look for. That are spikes, just because something passes at a passing level doesn't mean you still shouldn't look at the number because, like, example, say lead is a 0.5, 0.2, something like that? 0.5, okay. And so if it's at 0.447, I'm still going to want to pay attention to that because that's right on that cusp, Well, I already know that I shouldn't be consuming lead via inhalation, especially once you're playing to the shit.
Yeah, I mean, how is it reacting within your like lungs, and
Exactly.
if lead is poisonous within your like at too high of levels, too poisonous in your bloodstream.
Well, I mean, plus if you're consuming those things on like a continual basis, like you're getting, you're probably getting a buildup of those over time.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's accumulation.
And like so many of the pesticides and heavy metals can create neurological deficits and things like that. And like we at Patients for Safe Access, obviously, we advocated strongly for them to expand the pesticide, panel in the state of Oklahoma. And that was mostly because we were only testing for 13. And whenever this venture first started for me as a patient, okay, we took some products out to California and we had them tested at a lab out there. They test for, I think, 66 or 106 is their panel.
I think they
Such
just
a-
expanded it. It was 66.
It was
Yeah.
66? Okay. And so, when we took a product out there, out of 66 pesticides tested for, one single pre-roll failed for 19 pesticides. And I was like, we're literally failing a product from Oklahoma for more pesticides than the state even tests for. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that's really where our push came for the expansion panel, to kind of give a little bit of background there. You know what I mean? I was pretty blown away by that. And I think at first, maybe you guys had a little bit of opposition to the pesticide panel. Yes? No?
Yeah, we did.
It's okay.
So
It's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, this is great. This is great.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. I'm sorry.
No,
You still-
no. So give me your opposition to it
Yeah,
initially,
yeah.
because I think it had to do with, and I hate to say it this way, it's going to make you guys almost have to like dumb down your equipment the way they're doing it, right?
Okay.
Not
Well,
necessarily.
Yeah, so there's a few things that are being discussed here, but
All right,
okay, so
This is good. This is
let's
good.
go with the first part. So, okay, yeah, we were kind of opposed to the initial expansion of the pesticide panel, but not to include more pesticides. It was just the way that you go about doing that. So, if you read how people come across determining what things to test for, they usually do surveys, and that's exactly what our lab did. We did a report before the rules meeting in December. So we went to a bunch of hardware stores, we went to grow supply stores, we went to just all sorts of various places, and we wanted to see what products were on the shelf that were available to people to get to treat pest and mold and other things, or not mold, I'm sorry, but like powdery mildew, the things that you would get sprayed on there.
Right.
So what you would normally do is you would survey as many products as you can find, and then you would find which ones are the most common ones, and then you would build a list of those, and then at some point you kind of cut off the top parts of hey, the top quarter, third, whatever the list is, we're going to go test for these because these are the most likely things that are going to be found in the products, right? So the only thing we really objected was that if this list was relevant to the things that were available in the Oklahoma market that people could get, that was really our only objection, and the fact that we were hoping that the agency would go and do this survey, but
Right.
but instead
They didn't.
yeah, so we did it instead, and we proposed at that meeting 18 different pesticides to look at, and some of those were not on the current list that we're testing for, and then on the expanded list, which is almost 60 or maybe it's 60. Some of these things were not on there as well, and we could go to Tractor Supply and pick up this one pesticide that was a potent carcinogen, and we won't ever be testing for it because
And it's right down the street.
yeah, and it was never considered. But these are so. That was the only reason that we objected to this, is that we just wanted to make sure that it was relevant to Oklahoma market and the things that were available here. But
we also are in a global market. That's the rough part about this, is that we are in a global market that you can import in it. Well, now with tariffs, that kind of creates a different conversation. But still, price point and what you're not testing for. This is where it's an arms race within the businesses to be well, what are you testing for? What's your list? And what are the new derivatives?
Because you're not
constant arms race.
Right.
well, and then plus the market's always evolving too. Is pests become resistant to certain pesticides. They actually change.
Absolutely, they do.
They change pretty rapidly. So we looked at a study. I believe it was
Generations quickly.
yeah.
They live and die very quickly.
We looked at a study that was done in Europe that was looking over I think 300 or 400 different pesticides, and they found most of them were irrelevant because the regulations were trying to catch up to all these pesticides, but the market had already gone so far beyond that by the time the regulations came in place for all these pesticides, it was irrelevant. They had already moved on.
Yes, a higher number doesn't necessarily mean safer.
Right.
This is where the conversation of you guys had great intentions. Your intentions were same deal. I've had that conversation with people before. We only test for 13 pesticides. sorry, I don't trust what you have to smoke, because I know the game, right? You would just, these are the 13 we're not going to pay attention to, right? And then you have the other growers that then also argue, why even use those? They actually end up being more expensive.
Right.
Well, I mean, we've said that to plenty of times to like growers and all that. They're like, in the regulations, it clearly states these 13, and if you have it in there, you're going to probably fail. So, like, just don't.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they can't use other pesticides and other
100%.
products, which is kind of what you were saying. Like, it failed for 19 that were
not tested here, but yet we're tested there. So you knew that would have been a deterrent. So that totally makes sense of like,
Yeah.
let's expand it to at least that 60 or 60
Right.
or
Yes. Let's
80
at least
or
do something more
1,000
than the bare
or
minimum.
yeah,
Yeah,
what
that's
are
kind
what
of
are the
my
bad
goal.
ones? And yeah,
Exactly.
why are we not attacking technically all
Yeah.
of them?
But also something that you just brought up recently, a moment ago, was about the regional relevancy also of pesticides and things like that, depending on the types of bugs that you have in your region and what you're using. So what might be something that we need to be testing for here, maybe they don't need to test for, say, in California, or something like that. So that was pretty interesting as well, I've got to say.
Yeah, so I mean, like in California, they have a huge agricultural market. They have much more accessibility to different types of pesticides there. So the using a panel from California isn't quite as relevant here.
And the Department of Agriculture actually on their website, they have an approved pesticides list for like hemp. And being as hemp is cannabis sativa, you know what I mean? That's the same approved pesticide list for the cannabis, stuff like that. And I don't quite understand why they don't make that a little bit more known, because if that's the approved pesticide list, like why are people using, say, Roundup from Tractor Supply, or something like that? What's the... Why are they getting away with that, I guess, more so? Oh, their sister. So, all right. So tell me, you, Mo, were talking the other day about transparent testing. So let's see if we can, squeeze Mo in here. Come on, Mo.
All right.
He's like, I was not planning on being camera ready. Makeup,
Too
lights,
late.
camera. Well, that way they can also hear you a little bit more, too. So.
Yeah. Oh.
All right, so tell me a little bit about the transparent testing and what that is.
So this has been like a concept me and Jeff have been talking about for like the last probably since the beginning.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, since kind of the beginning, we've kind of had this discussion. I've always kind of had the discussion of like, if you're a patient, how do you know what to trust if it's not really being? We have the technology, obviously, with right now. We have a phone and a camera and a microphone. Why as the consumer are you just in the dark on a process that you're testing, you're trusting these entities to provide you a safe product? But how do I know it's safe if everybody's got vested interests in keeping proprietary information, but also at the other end of like what science or what information is being suppressed in order for it to be profitable, which totally makes sense. But how do you know what to trust? And as a consumer, why aren't you willing to show me? Because the technology exists, it's very cheap, actually, to show me how you're growing my medicine. So I'm choosing to trust you. And also then the new, and that's kind of the problem even with the research, where what gets financed to then maybe go against whatever product or chemical or compound that ends up being a pesticide or something else. But for us, it's like, why wouldn't we just show everything?
Right.
Why not build that trust? And it's always kind of been a scary situation. I've talked to other growers too about the same deal. Like, hey, you have a grow. Why don't you just brand on transparency? Everyone talks about branding. It's like, why wouldn't you just show people this is my ingredients list. Also, my thing with them lately has been like, well, with AI, information on botany, information on a lot of different stuff, biology. I mean, there's gonna be protocols that are gonna be there. It's just a matter of who actually wants to do the right work.
Right.
So for us on our end of it, I think it'd be really cool just to be like, hey, here's the information, here's what we know, and here's what the laws are telling us to look at. But here's also other things we look. There's certain times that because the strains of Salmonella or E. coli, it has to be that specific strain. Well, what if it's a cousin?
Right.
And then I'm combusting it, and then I'm smoking it, but it's totally legal.
Yeah, this reminds me of that issue with the Tyson chicken from a year or two ago that had the different type of salmonella they weren't looking for, and so it ended up, I think, a couple of infants died, if I'm correct on this. And the Tyson chicken was aware that they had this problem, but because it wasn't the regulated salmonella, they were allowed to put the product
I
out.
do recall that actually, and it was exactly that way.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So we could end up with the same issues throughout our medical cannabis just because of just the way things have been.
The way they're written. Yeah.
Possibly. I mean, I know that's why there was issues with
shown.
restrictions of like on the whole thing where the OMA was only looking at Delta 9 at one point instead of like all cannabinoids, which caused a problem with like the Delta 8 and Delta 10 and THCO and all of these things. Yeah, there was a lot of other. Yeah, exactly.
But do you know that the OMA is technically not able to regulate Delta 8 and Delta 10 inside the dispensaries?
Yeah, I think
There's
they're
legislation
just
that
limited.
Was the way
They were
things
just
written.
limited to like Delta 9 and maybe
Yeah.
now Delta 9 and THCA is what I think I understand.
Yeah, they've included it now. They've
Yeah.
included it to the Delta 9. I think, if I understand correctly, I may be wrong, but I think that they've taken the interpretation of like the THCA and Delta 9 and the conversion rate.
So
Wow.
being a total THC type
Yeah,
thing instead.
now it's total
Right.
THC. So
Right.
they've umbrellaed, but yeah, on the others, like you said, Delta 8, Delta 9, or Delta 10, I mean, that's constantly.
So when you were talking to me about the transparent testing thing, though, what interested me is, it comes off as kind of like access to a live feed, of
Yeah,
what you're
24/7
doing.
live stream.
Yeah.
I think it'd be really cool to just show actually this is how, and then also for like Jeff being a scientist, like, hey, this is how I'm actually calculating. These are our calculations. Here's our equations. Here's how we're judging, how we're interpreting the biological matter, right? How we're with the instrumentation as kind of like, here's how the instruments are used. Here's what's actually happening.
Yes, I mean, in some ways it's accountability
Having ongoing
for
discussion.
the people that are performing the work in a transparent lab. So like everything's accountable there, and you have the ability to see it and like see how it's being done. But and then you're not really worried about like other things that could be happening in the background.
Yeah.
I gotta say, I think it's pretty cool because not only as a patient side of it, but also from your client side of it. If a client's like, well, how is my stuff being handled, or this, that, or the other, you allowing them to have access into your lab, basically the eyes into your lab.
Yeah.
You're showing them your SOPs in real time. You know what I mean? You're showing them the processes and how you're handling things. And I think accountability is the exact right word. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We have to create accountability in these cannabis industries, no matter what state you're in, because I know all of the states have issues. You know what I mean? And if we don't create accountability through transparency and trust through transparency, you're right. We have been forced in this industry basically to be forced to trust what we're told, not what we can see. You know what I mean? And
Or get to understand from our own perspective, right? So if someone telling you, don't worry, it's safe, or don't worry this,
But
rather than you being.
I mean, we're seeing from the reports that there are still issues here that are coming down to the accountability there. So like these are kind of showing some accountability. The transparent part is kind of showing accountability, and
so some of the other reports that you've done, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say, but like, so the dynamic for like OMA, they're kind of stuck in this position that they've followed the market of what California did, what Colorado's done. So then within the government entities, they're kind of just following that normal bullet point, that normal flow chart. And this is the rough thing where you have like, during the last open rules, we've kind of asked for the state to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Like you guys technically have like really good money.
I wonder if the QA lab will let us see their shit.
That's kind of the whole thing.
we
like,
didn't see the first QA lab that they had. We never saw data from that.
Yeah, and that's kind of the rough part is if you're a citizen, and this is supposed to be a government of the people, by the people, for the people, and the state, these other entities are representing us, representative government. It's a rough thing to be like, hey, why aren't you guys educating us on the science? Why aren't you showing the argument out loud onto certain things? On like, hey, here's actually how we measure things. Hey, here's how we're openly auditing people. Right. This is how we're going to audit, secret shop, because you don't know technically. If there's no transparency, it's hard to know who's being selective and what, because it's just another human being making a decision. And so are they going to be selective to the ones that are telling them in their ear saying, these are the bad guys, these are the people to pay attention to, these are the bad grows, even though somebody else would be doing something else on the other end.
Well, absolutely. That's kind of why we try to point out on these reports. It's like we selected random products, that we had bud tenders and people like picking that we went to multiple different locations, just just to try to
Be as
keep
unbiased
it
as possible.
unbiased as possible.
But we also
And
need
then
to be able to
what
show
are the
that
results?
out loud,
Right.
right? So like I think in like real time, it's like, well, then how are you guys? How are we judging it, right? Just
Right.
like you said, well, which pesticides? Like we put out one for 19. Is that technically the better thing? Like it is a recommendation according to what we pulled on what's the highest
Right.
grossing. Like most common
Yeah.
is in like the pesticides that are coming off the shelf. Like
Mhm.
what's being paid, and obviously cannabis is a big industry in
Mhm.
the whole
Agriculture
market.
here.
Yes,
Mhm.
exactly. So it makes sense to even look on the national way of like where are the pesticides being bought everywhere. But yeah, that conversation of what do you pick, what do you choose, and it's almost like research and education on how do you measure that.
So let me ask you guys as a lab, okay? So some of the other states, they break down categories, okay? Inhalable, ingestible, topical, things like that, and they're testing thresholds, okay? So do you think that that's something that Oklahoma should, look at doing? Because, currently, I don't know if you know who Representative Ty Burns is, but I met him at the Veterans Roundtable meeting in like November 2023. And he stood up and he spoke at that meeting and he talked about how him and 4 other people were basically the people in the room to determine and set the standard for pesticide levels in Oklahoma for cannabis, okay? But he also made the statement that they basically just adopted the standard for food. And to me, that is such an irresponsible thing to do because ingesting it, we detoxify some of that, right? Inhaling it, we do not. And so do you feel like that there should be different limits set for inhalable, ingestible, topical, etc.?
Yeah, so I do know in regulation that there are some different limits set for like various things that we're testing for. But yeah, I mean, like probably a more thorough evaluation of like what the products are, maybe what their potential health hazards are overall. Like,
Right.
I mean, just sort of like how we were doing the survey with the pesticides. Like, survey the products that are out there, do a largest one you can, figure out which ones are like harmful and like what seems to be like a reasonable level if it was there.
Well, that's the thing on like vitamin E, right? The argument on vitamin E, you ingest it, right? It's good for you, but then you burn it, combust it, inhale it. It
Right.
turns into a toxic
Mhm.
thing for you, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the rough part on this is like certain things are look good on paper, then who's going to do that research?
Mhm.
How long is it going to take to do the research on the vitamin E? It took like a pretty bad thing, popcorn lung on some of those kids, right?
Mhm.
Just some really messed up stuff. And then eventually now the research comes out.
Right.
So as a patient, it's like the arms race of constantly having to find out what's
Well, and the way that
how the plant's cultivated, then what the byproducts end up being in the end result, and then what that laboratory, the science lab, is then testing for.
Well, then, yeah, just making sure you're staying up with what's going on. Like, I remember several years ago, somebody brought us an extract, and they were using refrigerant R134A to extract with, and they're like, well, it's not on the list of the solvents, so therefore, like, if we use this, then, and then,
Yeah.
so we basically made the recommendation. It's like, so we were basically like, okay, like, look, so yeah, you're absolutely right. It does pass as far as the regulations that are, the OMA regulations. However, I hope that you would, consider the fact that like this refrigerant, which is already like controlled in other ways, like
Right.
that you would at least try to eliminate this or have your own personal controls just for, like the safety of people that are using your products.
There was one situation where he saw fragments. He was telling me, and he saw fragments of permethrin.
Yeah.
Right. There was one product, and it was like a pretty decent sized company. It was like there was fragments, and he was like, I know the fragments are there, but technically we took it by like the law per se. This is the subjective of would this be a pass, would this be a fail, and I think we just failed it anyway because we can see the fragments.
Right.
So
So when I said something earlier about dumbing down your equipment, I want to touch back on that real quick because with the OMA and the new expansion list that they're putting out that's going to take effect in 2026, I think.
March
like
and
that.
December. It's in 2
March
weeks.
and December, yeah. So that is going to be a little bit burdensome to some of the labs, and some of the labs are already a little geared up for that. So kind of tell me where you guys are at on that and how it affects you guys.
Sure. So once again, I think these are two different topics, but for the
I'm good at that.
no worries. Like I'm all up for answering questions. So yeah. So as far as the equipment, yeah. So we are already geared up. We are. I think that we're the only lab in Oklahoma currently that is accredited both in the use of the LCMS or LCMS-MS, if you will, and then also the GCMS, because we'll need both of these different types of equipment in order to test for these pesticides. Like some are measured better by one piece of equipment, some are measured by the other piece of equipment. So like we're gonna have to test these on two different ones in order to be able to like accurately detect and report. Yeah. So
we'd argued for that before.
But I think what you're speaking to on the equipment specifications and all, there is legislation that has been coming up year after year that tells us what type of equipment, like the type of methods that we need to try to adhere to and other things. And so for me, like I came from working in like pharma life sciences for about 14 years before I came here.
Okay.
So I'm familiar with a lot of different types of equipment and all. And in fact, we use pharma grade equipment like throughout our lab. So for us, we don't want to go to using like a detector that's not as good, or to other pieces of equipment or methods that are not as good, or calibrations that are not appropriate for the equipment that we're using. So
Standardize.
Okay.
yeah, so if we standardize it, it could create
Standardize that has a lot of power involved.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, this is already accounted for. So like, as all labs have to be ISO accredited, it doesn't matter which type of equipment you use with ISO. Like, as long as you can pass the proficiency testing that we have to do every single year, that proves that we can detect it using our methods and sample preparation and everything. And as long as we can prove that, you should have the ability to use any piece of equipment. But I think the state is trying, or sorry, the OMMA, they're trying to cut down on variability between the labs by specifying methods and equipment, but I don't think we really think that that's as much of an issue as just other particular factors. So
I
yes,
could agree.
so we would really like for them to stop specifying the equipment and kind of focusing more on making sure that we can, pass these proficiency testing and that we're able to achieve these limits using whatever methods that we have. But also, I think before in the whole pesticide deal, they were trying to have us use this one piece of equipment, the LCMS or LCMS, if you like. And if we were to try to test all these pesticides on that piece of equipment, it was going to be very difficult to detect some of them. And we needed the ability to have the flexibility to use other pieces of equipment.
Right, that's
So-
just what they were trying to mandate.
Yeah,
Okay,
so-
that makes sense.
So that's something we were definitely fighting against. And currently we're kind of fighting a regulation that's been written into the proposed permanent rules to allow us more flexibility in equipment.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think they added the GCMS after you pretty much advocated for it.
yeah,
They added the GCMS because originally it was just going to be the LCMS-MS. It wasn't going to even be the GCMS.
yeah, and a lot of labs came out and they argued
Yeah.
against it. They're like, we're going to need to buy these really expensive detectors just to use like LCMS, like those really, really expensive ones. And I was like, well, we already like
You don't
Pest-
have to.
pesticide testing started off on GCMS and it's good for certain compounds. So why don't we use equipment that's been used for the last 40 years for pesticide testing instead of just this modern LCMS?
Yeah,
Like, why don't we use both?
why regulate? It doesn't really make sense on that end. It's like unless you're wanting to force people to go into a certain category of what they need to buy.
I wonder if their reasoning behind it is to create some type of standardization.
Easier to judge.
I do understand that, but I think there's like deeper issues outside of like equipment that kind of need to be addressed in the industry. That like equipment is not going to fix what the actual problems are.
No, it's a Band-Aid.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always
It's a Band-Aid.
And that helps go ahead.
No.
Well, I was gonna say, I mean, yeah, it always is a Band-Aid. You're right. It is a Band-Aid, and from their position, it's not. I don't blame the legislators. A lot of times you go into a place and it looks just absolutely like immaculate. It looks the part. They've spent millions of dollars on their build out, and it looks. Jeff would joke around in pharma and call that show labs. And I'm not saying anybody's a show lab.
Right.
The people will be like, "Oh, I heard you guys were like the most accurate," and I'm like, "Well, I really don't know that."
Right.
Truthfully, like, yeah, I'd love to say that, but I really honestly don't know that. I'm not in every other lab. It's hard to see. That's kind of where the transparency and the science aspect comes in. Is like, let's have a discussion about how are we measuring these things, rather than a regulation game to an extent.
So speaking of discussion, the OMA, our regulatory body, used to have lab roundtables, right? So that went away a while ago, right?
Yeah.
And I do believe that Lee has said, that Lee Bingley Rhodes, our lab science director at the regulatory agency, when we've met with him in the past, he has talked about reinitiating those. Have you guys gotten any feedback on whether or not they're going to start that back up yet?
I'm not sure. So this last EAC meeting that we went to, they were talking about doing some actions that they'd done before, like parallel testing with their QA lab and potentially round robin testing. But I still think, like, as far as like the transparency piece, I think that would really solve these accountability issues of like, you could report one thing on a test that you're giving to the state or for proficiency testing, but are you doing the same thing with all the rest of your samples?
Can your protocols be deviated from?
Yeah. So things that are like unwritten deviations from protocols that do happen in labs. I mean, like, there's plenty of stories of like, I think it was last January in California, they shut down 85% of the labs for, they got basically secret tested for potency, and they found that these labs were like not accurate at all.
Yep.
How many years of having a legal market did it take them then to do that?
Yeah, but
So that's kind of what I'm saying.
really
Oklahoma's following the protocol. It's like California's had a legal market for how long?
Yeah, but I don't think they really started regulating California's market until about 2018, the same year we legalized. If you
Wow,
look
I did
back.
not know that.
Yeah, like testing wise and all kinds of
I
other
did not know
things.
that. So who knows what was even on the market? Like
Right.
what you were joking around about earlier. I was
Yeah.
thinking like gas. One of my friends, Gary, he says gas can weed. Like get people getting it shipped over in gas cans.
Yeah.
Now it's like, so that who knows what fumes? What was that gas can using before? He's like, people throw a big fit about some of this stuff, and he's right, but also to an extent.
So you said that these reports are available on your website, right?
Yeah, we do have links to these. So like on our social media pages,
Okay.
we do have links to these reports. And I mean, if you look them over and you have questions about this, or kind of what you were talking about before with being able to read test results, like we really want to make sure that patients are able to read these lab reports and understand them. I watched this interview a long time ago with Carl Sagan, and he was basically talking about, making sure people understood science and math and technology, because like everybody should be knowledgeable in that. And I believe exactly the same thing. I want people to understand like how the lab works. I want them to understand how to read test results. I want them to understand what we're doing, because it is important to them, and it's important that they communicate back with us, like if there's issues, things that they're like concerned about, or anything of that sort. And that requires a two-way conversation.
Absolutely. As a patient, if you have asked for a lab result and you have questions about that lab result, reach out to that lab. We've actually done that on other products purchased from other states and stuff like that. We've called those labs and been like, hey, we have questions about your results compared to a test that we did on the same product. You know what I mean? And since you're the originating COA, we have questions about that product. And so patients reach out to the labs. They don't mind answering questions. Fellows like these, they're here all day, So tell me your socials real quick so that people can look on your socials and link up to these.
Sure. I think just by searching Havard Industries LLC, something along that, like, you should be able to find it. So we have lots of posts on Instagram and Facebook.
Okay, there we go.
We're trying to be more
Facebook?
active, and then I'm trying to set up the site where it's the 24/7 live stream, and then
Sweet.
from there have people be able to literally relay questions or any stuff like that. Of like, well, what are you guys doing on there? And we can always kind of make that it's pretty mobile. It's going to be pretty mobile to where we can pull the camera off, go closer, zoom in closer to whatever. If we can, I'm trying to set it up where we can see the questions on the stream and then show what we're doing.
Well, guys, this has been absolutely amazing. I am thrilled. I've got so much more things I have questions about now. I have so much more to go learn and ask more about and come back to. And so I'm sure this is not going to be our only time sitting on the couch. But I would love to have you guys back on again, obviously. And, as things progress, we see each other at the Capitol all the time, and we'll be bumping into each other and making progress in the state of Oklahoma. And you guys should be doing the same in your states. So make sure to subscribe to WTHC Radio if you're not already a subscriber. You can also subscribe to me at Summer Parker, Patients for Safe Access on YouTube. And go fund me. Go fund me, because I'm a broke white bitch, let me tell you. So I'm just telling y'all, in order to proceed with what we do as Patients for Safe Access, to work with the labs like these guys, we need funding to purchase products and pay for the cost of any testing associated with that. So, guys?
For us, we have to sell it at a cost.
Right.
The transparency.
Yeah, required by
I think it'd be really cool if you guys literally kind of body cam yourself, picking the sample. They know you haven't tampered it, and you're bringing that sample over, and then we're doing the same thing with the cam of
We
them
have
picking
considered
picking that sample and just directly, it's like direct, like nothing's been manipulated. And I would actually hope other labs kind of jump in on this as well.
I would too.
Of like, let's just kind of get butt naked, man.
Let's get butt naked.
Everybody get butt naked.
All right, butt naked with Bo at Havard Labs. Y'all heard it here. All right,
In order to trust it, maybe we gotta get butt naked. Yeah.
That is it. We're gonna sign out. We're gonna say much love, one love, and we will catch these fellas later.
Thanks for having me.
And we're out.
Stepping up strong with a righteous plea. Summer Parker fighting for you and me. Patients need what the doctor has said. Safe access now to the meds they bred. One love, one fight, don't you delay. Rights for the people in every way. We stand tall, we won't back down. Safe access is the anthem sound. Safe access is the anthem sound. The struggle is real, so is the fire for health and hope. We climb higher, stand with the ones who can't stand alone. For every voice deserves a throne. Compassion leads where the laws resist. A healer's heart can't coexist with barriers blocking what we deserve. The people's needs must be preserved. One love, one fight, don't you delay. Rights for the people in every way. We stand tall, we won't back down. Safe access is the anthem sound.